right, we are good to go. We are being recorded on WebEx and are also live on YouTube.
Okay, thank you very much. Good morning and welcome to the August 9th meeting of the New York State DNA Subcommittee. At this time, I'll take attendance to establish a quorum. We will conduct the business today through roll call as we have members present here in Albany and virtually. So please respond present when I call on you. Dr. Bieber.
Frederick Bieber, present.
Dr. Gettings.
Present.
Dr. Sozier.
Amanda Souza, present.
Dr. Corrado.
Present.
Dr. Smith.
Present.
And Dr. Kidd.
Present.
Thank you. And including myself, we have established a quorum. First item on today's agenda is to review and approve of the meeting agenda for today. You've all received a draft agenda for today's meeting. Is there any discussion regarding this agenda? Okay, hearing none. Do I have a motion to approve the agenda for this meeting?
So moved.
I have a motion from Dr. Smith. Do I have a second? I have a second from Dr. Kidd. When I call on you, please state your vote. My vote is aye to approve. Dr. Bieber.
Fred Bieber, aye.
Dr. Gettings.
Catherine Gettings, aye.
Dr. Sozier.
Amanda Souza, aye.
Dr. Corrado.
Aye.
Dr. Smith.
Aye.
And Dr. Kidd.
Aye.
The motion carries. The next item is to review and approve the draft minutes from the May 10th, 2024 meeting. You received the draft minutes from the May 10th meeting. Is there any discussion regarding these minutes? Hearing none, do I have a motion to accept the minutes from the May 10th, 2024 meeting?
So
Dr. Corrado? I have a motion from Dr. Corrado. Do I have a second?
Second.
And a second from Dr. Smith. So when I call on you, please state your vote. My vote is aye. Dr. Bieber.
Fred Bieber, aye.
Dr. Gettings.
Catherine Gettings, aye.
Dr. Sozier.
Amanda Souza, aye.
Dr. Corrado.
Aye.
Dr. Smith.
Aye.
Dr. Kidd.
Stay.
Thank you. The motion carries. Next up on our agenda is the accreditation and laboratory updates. So we will first hear from Erie County Central Police Services Forensic Laboratory. In April, ANAB conducted a surveillance activity. This included an external QAS audit, and the laboratory received and remediated one finding related to the FBI QAS testing document. ANAB has issued the continuation of accreditation documents. The lab has also received their final QAS documents and submitted them to the FBI for review. We do have members of the lab available to speak if there are any questions. Does anyone have any questions for the laboratory? Let's see, Dr. Sozier?
I did have one question. And it had to do with the plan for follow-up and monitoring the activities. And also to the solution.
Does it have Maria?
Yeah, it looks like Maria has joined us. There we go.
Hi, I'm Maria. It looks like you had a change in the way that you're processing your samples in the laboratory, and that this came up because the procedures that you normally use just didn't work in a case like this. So when they were only trained on one aspect, they weren't being put onto a proficiency testing register for that one aspect, because in the past you did it once everything was done. And I was wondering, do you use a checklist when you do training?
We do have a training checklist.
You do?
Yeah, this was the first instance where we had analysts that stopped at Y-screen and did Y-screen only.
So I was just wondering, because I bet this might, your corrective action was that you put them onto the proficiency testing roster, but I'm wondering if you might want to consider adding to the checklist as part of the training that person is put onto the proficiency testing roster for whatever procedure they're learning. And then, yeah.
That's a great idea.
Okay. That was just my thought, that then whatever they're doing, you'll have to look to say, is there a proficiency needed, and then put that on. I think that was really, let me just look. Oh, and I did have a question on the root cause analysis. Why was 14 blank?
Do you want to answer?
Yeah, go ahead.
14 was blank because it was essentially answered in number 13.
Okay. I think those are really important to kind of do those whys sometimes. And I know it's really hard. I have a hard time with it, but I think it's like, why did that happen? Why did that happen? And you might have said, well, we didn't have a trigger for proficiency tests, that type of thing. And that I would always encourage you to fill those out. Okay.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
Yep, I think that's it.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Sozier, and thank you, Maria and Tom.
Yeah, thanks.
Are there any other questions? Sorry, I should have said that before I told them thanks. So let's, the next item on the agenda is from Monroe County Crime Lab. We do have Gail from the lab able to answer any questions virtually. In April of 2024, the laboratory underwent a surveillance activity, which included an external QAS audit. The laboratory received and remediated one finding related to biology. ANAB has issued the continuation of accreditation documents. There were no QAS findings. The FBI acknowledged receipt and notified the lab that due to the late submission, the audit is not in compliance and should result in a finding on their next audit. And specifically from the QAS section 15.5.2, for INDUS participating laboratories, all external audit documentation and laboratory responses shall be provided to the FBI within 30 days of laboratory receipt of the audit document or report. Does anyone have any questions for the laboratory?
Mike, is there going to be a corrective action on that finding, even though the finding hasn't, they know it's an issue? I'm just trying to get down to that. Maybe that would be a question.
Okay. We'll get Gail Conklin has joined, so give her a second to, there we go.
Morning. We have initiated a corrective action for this future finding, so hopefully it will be remediated before it's an actual finding. We have not completed the root cause analysis yet, but the initial discussions are, I was not included on the email when the final QAS document came, And the other individuals in the lab were not aware that I was not part of that. So it was just a lack of communication. So we're gonna dig deeper in a root cause.
Yeah, because I think sometimes even, just for the whole lab to know that, or whoever's involved in that audit, to know that you've passed. It's good for the analyst to know too. Okay,
Okay,
thanks.
thank you. Are there any other questions for the laboratory? Okay, thank you, Gail. Next is the New York State Police Crime Laboratory. We do have members of the laboratory here in Albany present for any questions. The laboratory has notified ANAB that the Director of Forensic Services for the New York State Police Crime Lab, Ray Wickenheiser, has retired, and that Dr. Jill Dooley will be his replacement. Are there any questions for the laboratory?
I just want to say congratulations to Jill, and we'll miss you, Ray, if Ray's listening. It's been great working with Ray for many, many years. I'm sure he'll be out and about, but what a great decision to pick Jill. So congratulations, Jill.
I second that.
I was gonna second it, I'll third it.
I think it's a unanimous consent here. Congratulations, Dr. Dooley. And I actually saw Ray on a Teams call to Australia earlier this week, so he's busy. Are there any other questions? Okay, seeing none. Well, next item is the Onondaga County Center for Forensic Sciences Laboratory. We do have Renee from the lab is able to speak virtually if there are any questions. The laboratory has notified ANAB that the QA manager, Kathleen Hum, will be out of office on extended leave until August 31st, and that the laboratory director, Renee Ho, will be acting QA manager. Does anyone have any questions for the laboratory? Okay. Next is the Westchester County Department of Labs and Research Division of Forensic Science. We do have Lydia available for any questions and Colin available for any questions virtually. In June, the laboratory underwent a full re-accreditation assessment activity. This included an external QAS audit. The laboratory received 4 non-DNA biology-related findings and 1 biology-related finding, specifically in the QAS section 6.4.10. In biology, an intermediate check for 3500G genetic analyzer was not performed in 2023 as required by FBI QAS 10.3.2 and 10.3.26. The laboratory submitted a challenge to the 1 biology finding, 6.4.10. After reviewing the challenge information, the ANAB concluded that this challenge was upheld against the ISO 17025-2017 requirements, finding that the nonconformity to be unsupported. The laboratory has submitted additional remediation documentation for the other findings to ANAB and is awaiting the final review. There were no QAS findings. The lab has submitted the final QAS documents to the FBI for review. Does anyone have any questions for the laboratory?
I have a question about, it seemed when they provided the documentation, it was fairly straightforward that what they had covered the requirement. I'm just curious what the conversations, what was that documentation not available when they were doing the audit, or just I'm a little confused why it was given in the first place. If they can shed some light on that.
So we have both Colin and Lydia joining us virtually. Give them a second here to log on.
I'm here. Good morning.
Good morning.
Hi, good morning.
Did you hear the question?
Yes.
Yeah,
How did it happen in the first place? Colin, were you gonna, I'll toss it to you.
Sure. Yeah, to be honest, we were also a little bit confused about why the finding was issued in the first place. I think it was a little bit of confusion. We had in our manuals that a preventive maintenance needed to be done annually. Because of the vendor, we had scheduling issues with the vendor, so it wasn't able to be done during the calendar year. But it seemed like there was confusion as to the differences between the preventive maintenance and the performance check. So the performance check was very clearly done in May of 2023. So we did miss our own implemented deadline for the preventive maintenance, but we took it out of service when we realized we wouldn't be able to do it. So we really, did everything that we could have about that situation, which is why it was the finding was taken back.
So you had all that document present when the auditor was actually there and you provided that to them?
Yeah, I believe they had everything that we had. Yes.
And there still was a finding?
Correct.
Okay, just checking. Thank you.
Any
Colin,
other? Yes, Dr. Sozier.
Yeah, I was wondering, can you, and this is just more of a curiosity question, but looks like there were a lot of emails to try to schedule that preventative maintenance. Can those be like scheduled ahead of time or in a contract somehow that, that's just it's just a curiosity question. Like, can you schedule those at the beginning of the year?
You know what? I think it's certainly something worth reaching out to them about. If anybody didn't read it, yeah, we started communicating with the vendor in October to try to get this preventive maintenance done by the end of the calendar year. They had some personnel issues. It's not something that I think has ever really been an issue for us before. But yeah, you know what? It can't hurt to reach out now that it's August and say, hey, we want to make sure somebody can come in before the end of the year.
Any other questions for the lab? Okay, hearing none, thank you, Lydia and Colin, for jumping on.
Thank you for your questions.
The next item on the agenda is old business. So we'll start with the partial match update. And so at this time, I'll turn it over to Shelley to give us an update regarding the partial match program.
And now that the news about Jill, we've heard that, just a quick update in that on her departure, I will be the interim director at OFS. So I think everyone received that email as well. Some big shoes to fill, but working through that. Thank you. So our partial match update, as we've seen for years now, there is no update. Unfortunately, there's no information to be given there.
Okay, thank you. And again, congratulations, Shelley, for your role now as the interim director. For the next item, the familial search update. Oh, we got a second, and I assume it's
yes.
On that, so on the familial search update, Shelley will now give us an update regarding that program. At the May meeting, it was discussed that a review of the partial match and familial search policies will be taking place. I'll let you go ahead and give your update.
Sure. So we have received one new application since May. It's still working its way through the approval process, and we've completed 2 searches since the May update. That would be, our total numbers are 59 applications in total, with 42 approved, 13 rejected, 3 withdrawn, and 1 pending approval. And of the 42 approved, there are 6 in queue, 36 completed, 25 with no results to release, 11 with results. Those are our numbers. And as for the review, the partial match policy and the familial search policy have a periodic review worked into them. And so we sent those documents out to both this group and the commission for any comments or thoughts. We had a couple thoughts from Dr. Corrado. I don't know if you want to discuss that, but I'm open to what we would like to see with the policy.
Does anyone have any comments that you would like to share at this time or any discussion? I see Dr. Bieber, you're recognized.
Yes, I have a question, Shelley. My recollection is that the search profiles in the past were only on the 15 locus profiles and not on the full global filer panel. Can you update us on which profiles you're using? Because some samples you've typed for smaller number of markers and others for a larger number of markers.
So as you know, we have a partnership with the state police for the analytical work. So I'm going to ask them to come up and discuss what their program is.
Good morning. I'm Dan Myers. I'm with the state police. I'm the technical coordinator in the data bank, and I'm responsible for the familial searches and reviews of them. This is your question. We have updated. We do search global filer profiles, global filer unknowns. At the moment, we don't have a software package that online that can do upfront. So until we have that online, we do it like a post search using PopStats, so that the list that comes out, we're further filtering using those additional loci. For any of the offender matches that come back, we will use the global filer loci against them.
Okay, thank you. I have a second question, a little off the mark here, but have you been asked by any of the DAs in the state to do Y haplotype searches based on surnames? There's a growing interest in coordinating Y haplotypes with last names, and there's been a recent success in one such surname search in the province of Quebec, which will be discussed at an upcoming International Association of Homicide Investigators meeting in Ottawa, Canada in September that I'll be attending, as will Ray Wickenheiser. And we've had a recent case in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts where I believe the investigation was fatally flawed, both in concept and execution. The trial ended in a hung jury, and it's going for retrial. The case is Commonwealth versus McClendon. And I'm wondering what experience New York has had with Y haplotypes and surnames.
In the data bank, we haven't been asked that. I don't know if DCGS has been approached about that, but I have not heard anything to that effect.
Not on our end either, Dr. Beaker. We have not been asked that.
Are you typing any of the samples of convicted offenders for Ys?
Yes, when we conduct a familial search or partial match evaluation, the Ys are done on the back end. Any returns that come back within the list, we will do Ys, but we don't search the Ys directly first. They only get searched after returns from familial search or partial match.
Sure, I understand that, but my question, I'm sorry I didn't ask it well enough. In your convicted offender database, do you have any Y data on those convicted offenders or only autosomal markers?
Yeah, the Y data does get stored. We do have it.
It does. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, go ahead.
Again, question about the YSTRs. I'm just curious if you can answer this. Do all the partial matches that you've done and you get your EMR and EKR and then you go ahead and do Ys, were there any cases where the Ys allowed you to make further information that you didn't already, that were different maybe than what the EMR, EKR? I guess the reason I'm asking is, do we feel like the Ys are necessary I know they're a nice thing to have, but if we don't have Ys, if we don't have more sample, is it possible for us to still do it? Do we feel like the Ys add a whole lot of value?
I think they do, but I think Tom could probably better answer the question because I'm not involved in partial match.
Good morning. Tom Leach, the Associate Director of the Unit Data Bank. We do find that there is value with the additional technology plus with the Y SDR. Going back to, we haven't had a partial match in a fair amount of time, but early on when this was asked with the CODIS administrators in New York State, the feedback was it does provide information, especially potentially for, excluding. So we would recommend continuing to do that.
And the same is true for familial searching.
Yes. Now, given the fact that there are certain circumstances that we are unable to get Y information from now, maybe we just can't get a complete profile for them. What we had presented previously at one of the DNA subcommittee meetings is moving forward. We did a forensic, we expanded on our validations so that Dan had done the work to create a ceiling threshold that would allow us, it's a more stringent threshold, but it would allow us to evaluate both, a male candidate that didn't have full Y profile. So it doesn't prevent us now from moving it. It's definitely a higher stringency, but we can still move forward with that if for some reason we're unable to get a Y profile.
That's actually what I was wondering, so that's helpful. Thank you.
Yeah.
I didn't realize we had changed that.
Let's see, Dr. Bieber, you're recognized.
Thank you. I have another question. Maybe Shelley is the best person to answer this. Are crime labs in the state of New York typically issuing reports with the actual results? Or do they just say that samples X, Y, and Z are excluded? There's no match between known samples from persons X, Y, and Z from the evidence. There's a growing trend in some counties and states and jurisdictions to make a statement about a so-called match or non-match, but without giving the actual data tables with the allele at each locus. And the reason this comes up is that there are some counties here and there that are collecting those data and creating their own local databases, especially on Ys, on the Y haplotype data, and using them on their own. They're not necessarily rogue databases, but there is some concern now and again about whether crime labs should actually be reporting the results in their reports, that is the allele tables. So can you update us, please, on your understanding of what's happening in New York State?
At this point, I don't think that I can answer that question. It's going to require gathering information. We don't typically at DCGS receive reports directly from laboratories. We do have the state police who could comment on their reporting. They're here. But the other labs, I couldn't speak to exactly what their reports look like.
I could at least say, I know that Onondaga does not report the alleles, and I'll let Julie speak, but she might know about the other lab. I know she knows about New York State Police. My understanding is there are not labs in New York that are still reporting the allele tables.
Yeah, I believe that's accurate. Our lab stopped including allele tables about 2014. So we just report like an interpretation of the profile and any sort of inclusions or exclusions. Because we had found that some agencies were like making their own interpretation when we provided the allele table, and it wasn't necessarily accurate because they just tended to not understand that a profile might be overall insufficient for comparison. So it also was part of our Lean Six Sigma program where we were just trying to streamline our reports and include only the relevant information. So if discovery is requested on a case, they will get the entire case file, which includes the allele tables. but the lab reports no longer include that information.
Thank you.
I think that's true for most of all the labs, but if you want to ask them, certainly.
Yeah, I think the biofig could speak to that.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Actually, Mike, I had a question, but it got answered with your question as well. So
Okay.
thank you.
I have one question.
Sure.
Or comment maybe about the familial search policy. You have said, I should speak to my comments. So one of the things I read in there for the familial search is that in order to search an unidentified human remain, one of the requirements is that it has to be developed from a deceased individual whose identity is unknown, which makes sense. And but then it also says, and whose death is suspected to involve the commission of a crime enumerated in, certain crimes enumerated in another section. And I guess I was wondering, and I don't know, maybe this is a policy issue for DCJS or New York State Police. Is there a reason other than we don't want to be inundated with hundreds and hundreds of samples that we're requiring that only unidentified human remains that were involved with crime can be searched? Why would it not be any unidentified human remains? So I don't really know who can answer that question.
I think probably Dr. Julie. We had several discussions about this.
Okay. It's great.
Thank you.
I'll sit next to Dr. Kidd. I don't think he doesn't bite.
Welcome back to the table.
Hey, thanks. I didn't want to be on the side table. So I think historically we've talked about that in terms of policy. If I revert back to my old position, like we definitely scrutinize the applications in a way where we want to make sure that as much information is valid and produced so that we can make decisions appropriately to how to expend the resources, right? Because in the beginning, we weren't quite sure how it was going to go. I think still we kind of reserve depending on the situation and what the incident details are, what evidence is presented in terms of approving or disapproving. To date, there has been no disapprovals of any of the unidentified human remains applications that have been submitted. Again, I think it's just dependent on who submits what, and then at the discretion of the commissioner, the DCJS for final approval. But we have talked about it. That's just how the edited language came up for the policy and remains.
So I appreciate that. So if you are considering updating the policy, is that something you would at least consider as an update?
I mean, I don't see this being prohibitive right now. I think you need to identify the human and the case circumstances, right? Like it could have been something, it could not have been something. So please come.
Just with respect to familial search, I mean, it does require that there be a profile in CODIS that's generated by a crime lab. So there has to be some indication that a death was associated with a crime in order for the crime lab to even accept that case for DNA to generate the profile. So it's not specifically, we know this is a homicide victim. It's just an unidentified deceased individual, or really the circumstances aren't entirely known because the identity of the person isn't known. So it's the first step is to have an investigation, a criminal investigation, and then have that case submitted. So it's really just tying into the fact that there has to be a law enforcement investigation and then a submission to the crime lab. And then if it is an unidentified remains, it could potentially be eligible for a familial search.
So I think I appreciate what you both said. I think what I'm understanding is suspected is they, which makes sense. Like if they don't know, then if the police are willing to submit it because they think it might be something, then we're fine. Which is
yes,
makes sense. Thank you.
Very fruitful discussion. Are there any more questions on the familial search? Yes, Dr. Sue.
I'm just interested if the New York State Police Prime Lab had any comments that they needed something changed? Did they have any comments where they felt something should be edited or modified?
There was a discussion, but no official comments. Is that accurate? We talked to, I think it was a very positive discussion and just going through some areas where, maybe this is something, do we want to talk about this? Do we want to talk about that? But, I don't think there's any official position on specific areas that needed to be changed or amended.
Okay.
And the commission will be looking at this as well at their meeting in September. So if they have any thoughts, I think it would kick back to you in November. So this is just the beginning of a conversation.
Okay.
Okay, if no other questions at this time, we'll move to the next item on the agenda in old business, CODIS bulletin. So it's my understanding that Tom Leach has notified OFS that there are no relevant CODIS bulletins at this time. Next item is the NIST interagency report. So NIST released a report in May authored by the Expert Working Group on Human Factors in Forensic DNA Interpretation entitled Forensic DNA Interpretation and Human Factors, Improving Practice Through a Systems Approach. The report was provided to members of the DNA subcommittee for review. Additionally, members of the BioTwig were requested to review the report and provide feedback, and there are members present to speak about this.
It would be Craig O'Connor. I believe Brianna needs to elevate him.
There we go. As we're getting Craig online. Morning, Craig.
Good morning. How's everyone?
Morning.
All right, so members, I guess I'll introduce myself. Craig O'Connor, Deputy Director at the New York City Office of Chief Medical Examiner and co-chair of BioTwig for New York State. We met recently to discuss this document, and we went through all of the different recommendations. Obviously, the document itself is hundreds of pages, so we didn't pour through it each one, but we did look at all the different recommendations and had a general discussion about it. From our standpoint with the New York State labs, well, one thing I think we want to echo what Dr. Corrado said at the last meeting, that there are many sets of recommendations and guidelines that are out there and best practices. And this is just another one to add to the pile. It's not a standard. We understand that it's not a standard for accreditation. So we're looking at it in terms of best practices and guidelines out there. A lot of the recommendations that were put forth in this document, most labs are already following, and that was the intent of the document, to point out not only best practices that labs should be following, but re-emphasize the ones that labs are already doing. So as the BioTwig, we looked at it that although a lot of these recommendations labs are following, most of them do overlap with some of the other standards and guidelines that are out there, the QAS, SWGDAM, ISFG, things like that, but some of them are in conflict with those documents as well. And they kind of put labs in a bind as to, which ones of these should they be following, which ones of the ones that conflict each other, which one is best practice, which one is not. So we took a look at it in terms of, are there things that do make sense and best practices that labs can be following? We're going to have our next meeting in October, and we'll have a more general discussion about that. The document itself, and I was a author on the document. I was part of the human factors group that put this together. We knew that there were some of these recommendations that labs may be able to implement right away, some that would take time, and some that were more of a pie in the sky type of situation, and the feasibility of labs to adopt them would be very hindered due to financial concerns and partnerships with some federal entities. One question that did come out during our discussion is why weren't these recommendations put out for public comment, which we would have to discuss with the steering committee with NIST in order to find that information out. But we did say that in part of discussing these recommendations, we would ask the subcommittee for their advisement if there's anything from a state level that we deem would be best practice to put in place. So at this time, when we meet in October, we may have more direct information about any sorts of questions that we would direct towards the subcommittee.
Thank you so much, Craig. I appreciate the time and effort that the BioTwig has put into this so far, and we look forward to more discussions from your upcoming meeting as well. At this time, does anyone on the subcommittee have any comments or would like to say anything at this point? I think what Craig has just outlined, I think it would be prudent for us to be partners with the BioTwig and see what they may have questions on for us moving forward. But does anyone have any questions or comments at this time?
Yeah, I echo that, Mike. I think it's largely a historical document in a weird way. I agree that based on my time on this subcommittee, looking at what the labs have been doing, that largely most of those best practices are being followed in New York. If there's anything, I look at this as a document, if there's anything the labs think this document supports that they need or want, but resources prevent them from doing it. I think that is something you guys should keep in mind too, because if you can neck down what you think might be relevant, that would help us a lot to chime in on it, because 400 and some pages, a lot. And I thank you too for your time, because one of the things that I thought was interesting, if you ask everybody to read this, this is like hours. I mean, my book club turns down books that are smaller than this. So I just want to say kudos to all of you who have read it thoroughly and looked at it, because it's a lot. But out of it, I think there were some conflicts, and I really want to hear from you guys what you perceive the conflicts are, especially as you're on the front lines. And at the end of the day, I think this kind of effort is to support you in the front lines who are doing this work, and to put additional restraints, conflicting guidelines in front of you is not always helpful. So I think we can wait till October. That would be my vote, to hear from you.
Dr. Prado?
I echo what Jen and Craig said as well, and you, Mike. I just have two comments. One is, I just want to point out something that I felt with this document is that I think some of the recommendations regarding testimony and some reporting recommendations are a little bit possibly shifting the responsibilities onto the scientists and the laboratories rather than on attorneys. So I think, it's always a balance when we're testifying to make sure we're clear and concise and at a level that the jury can understand, while at the same time remaining technically accurate. And I think some of the suggestions in the document, in my opinion, were a little bit extreme, or asking the scientists to every time they give a result to caveat it with a lot of information, which I think is a little bit unrealistic, because when you're testifying, you really can't just keep spewing information without being asked appropriate questions. And so I think I understand the basis behind it, and I don't disagree that we need to make sure we inform the jury of the limitations, but I also think that a lot of it falls on the attorneys to ask the appropriate questions. And what I would suggest is that if DCJS has the ability, or the BioTwig, to perhaps at some point reach out to NIPT, which is the New York Prosecutors Training Institute. At some point they may, maybe suggest they look at these these recommendations, or maybe the BioTwig could give them some guidance as to what prosecutors, might get some training on this as well to help the analysts if this is something they want to do. I would also say that I think these rules should apply to all expert witnesses, whether they're defense or prosecution. And I think that's a hard thing to manage, but I think it should be. And then lastly, the only other comment I was going to make is, again, the BioTwig looking at these is great. I would just remind the BioTwig, or ask them, I should say, if you do come to some consensus on reporting standards, to think about updating the standardized reporting that you have here in New York. I think if there's any suggestions, I do think it's helpful when all of the labs can agree on things when they're testifying and reporting, that the reports are similar, because some jurisdictions get reports from state police or they get them from other labs, and it's helpful if we're consistent within the state when possible.
Does anyone else have any comments at this time or questions?
I have a quick comment to Dr. Corrado's comment. In a conversation with the NICLAC chair about the upcoming TWIG meetings, and it's been about 10 years since there's been a really thorough vetting of that report standardization document for all groups. So I think NICLAC is looking to ask them to go back to the table and look at that document and see where there may be areas that need a deeper dive or improvements. So I think that probably plays into your comment.
Okay, any other comments, questions?
I just make a comment, thanks to the BioTwig, because it is a very long document to try to distill down. So I'll be interested to see, what comes from that. And again, echoing what Dr. Smith said, whatever the subcommittee can do to help in that for you.
Absolutely, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Craig. We will again we'll put this on hold, and we'll put a pin in it, I guess, and we'll get some more information come October. Next item on the agenda, new business.
Take this one, I know.
Sure.
Okay, there's no document for our new business, but just wanted to kind of open up a conversation or acknowledge that we recognize that rapid DNA is a hot topic and that the QAS is being updated, and it's looking like within 12 months time that will be effective. And over the past decade or so, multiple letters or memos have been issued to law enforcement agencies here in New York State, in addition to our labs and our district attorney's offices, reminding them of what the law that governs our use of biological fluids is. So we are working on another letter to remind those agencies to get that back out and have that conversation kind of continue. We know that it's exciting and that there is some usefulness to it, but the subcommittee years ago said if you're going to be using it in New York State, you need to come in front of the subcommittee. So we just want to remind all of the law enforcement partners that we have out there and the district attorneys and our labs that we recognize it's coming and that we still need to see people if they're going to be using it.
Okay. Next on our agenda are laboratory disclosures. So we will start with Nassau County Office of the Medical Examiner Division of Forensic Services. We do have members from the laboratory available to speak. The first item is a notification of unexpected results from a 2023 DNA proficiency test. These results relate to certain aspects of testing that the analyst did perform, and therefore did not report results for. The lab was unaware at the time that this should have been reported to ANAB. So that was the first item. Second item is a notification of a corrective action regarding orderly beast limbs system causing inadvertent custody transfers of controlled substance evidence. A quality investigation and corrective action is currently ongoing. Does anyone have any questions for the laboratory on these two items?
I have a question for the labs. They don't need to get on, but I just want to make a comment if that's okay.
Yes, go ahead.
I did notice the Nassau County lab when they had this issue come up, that one of the things they did was notify the QA twig, the state QA twig, which I just want to say kudos to them. I think it's really important for labs to do that. So one lab in the state had an issue with a software that they know the other labs are using, and they alerted everyone so they could check just to make sure it wasn't happening to them. And I just want to give them kudos for that and just say I think that's great practice, and I hope that continues.
Absolutely, that's a great point. Any other questions for the lab?
Mike, I'm sorry. Are we on the Westchester lab, that proficiency?
Not yet. We're still
Okay.
Nassau County.
Nassau, okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm just having a little bit of a hard time hearing.
I blame it on the new room.
So the microphones are up above us.
Yeah.
So like, sometimes maybe if we put our heads down, it gets lost a little bit. So just, we try to keep our chins up.
So, with the storm coming, we keep our heads up.
Yeah. Wise advice anyway.
Okay, no other questions for Nassau County. We'll move to the next item, which is the New York City OCME Department of Forensic Biology. We do have members of the laboratory available to speak virtually. There are two items. The first item is a notification of unexpected results from a 2023 DNA proficiency test. These results were reported as inconclusive. The laboratory reviewed the results and concluded that they were consistent with laboratory policy. The second item is a follow-up regarding the previously disclosed technical review protocol violation. This concludes the lab's investigation into the query results to determine if similar technical review protocol violations occurred. Further review of this is still ongoing. Does anyone have any questions for these two items to the New York OCME lab? Okay, seeing none, then we'll go to the next item, which is from Suffolk County Crime Laboratory. We do have members of the lab available to speak virtually. This is the initial notification of a corrective action in the biological sciences section. An incorrect amount of DNA extract was used for analysis. No additional extract was available for testing. The lab is currently performing an investigation and root cause analysis. Any questions for the laboratory at this time? Okay, hearing none. The next item is the Westchester County Department of Labs and Research Division of Forensic Science. We do have members of the lab available to speak. We have two items. The first and second items are notifications of unexpected results from 2023 and 2024 DNA proficiency tests. These results relate to certain aspects of testing that the analyst did not perform and therefore did not report results for. The next item is a follow-up to an inconclusive proficiency test result. An analyst received conflicting results on a saliva test. An inconclusive result was published in the report. This inconclusive was not the consensus result. The lab has concluded its investigation and provided a root cause analysis report. Does anyone have any questions for the laboratory?
Mike, I had a curiosity question for Westchester.
Okay, we'll get them online here? Okay, we have Colin and Lydia back online. Dr. Sozier, go ahead.
Hi. Where did this form come from? Did you develop that yourself?
Which form? We gave you a lot.
Oh, sorry, the root cause investigation worksheet.
Yes, it was created ourselves, yes.
It just looks very nice. And when, it seems to help going through the entire process.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Can we help with anything else?
Yes, we have a question from Dr. Corrado.
Okay.
Hi, Lydia.
Hi.
My question is a little bit relating to the issue, I think with this analyst, and I guess I have two concerns. The one was that it seemed like the analyst only went back to retest the saliva stain based on the DNA results, which is not really appropriate, which I think you mentioned in there. And the second was that there was some question about when the analyst documented the weak positive result from the first test, that it didn't appear like it was noted at the time the test was done and was perhaps added at a later date. And I guess I'd just like to hear how you're addressing those two issues with the particular analyst involved.
Yes. So let me start with the documentation. While we were performing our root cause analysis, one of the things that we did do is go back to our LIMS audit log to determine a timeline for when these notations were made. Because in our root cause and our response, one of the things that we were emphasizing was to document comments or anything that's unusual during the initial test, in other words, contemporaneously with when they're doing things. So we were looking in the LIMS to see when the notation was made. It was then discovered that the LIMS, I think we've had in the lab since 2007, and it's updated as needed. So there's a whole lot of different requests that were made over the years. And I'm not sure exactly when this particular formatting or process came to be, but the place where the notations are made by the analysts, it's on a page that if more than one notation is made about the case, it overwrites the date of the previous notations made on that page. So if the page only had one notation, you'd have the date that the notation was made. If additional notations were made on other dates, it overwrites the date of the other notations. So when we went back to look to see when that notation was made, it was overwritten by later notations. All of that is to say that we can only go by what was typed in the beast, and we couldn't confirm when that notation was made. And the analyst also said that they did not recall when that notation was made. So in answer to how are we dealing with this, all I can do is base how I move forward with the evidence at hand. We asked a direct question, and we aren't able to refute when that notation was made. So our remediation for that was to remind the laboratory and update our manual that if there are particular observations that are made about any type of test, that it must be made contemporaneously when they see the notation and not wait. So that's how we dealt with that part of it. And also, conversations were had with that particular analyst, stressing the need for doing things in a particular order. And you don't have to try to remember when you did it if you write it down exactly on the same date that you made that observation. As far as we agree with you that using the DNA result to go back to then redo this test was really, it just doesn't follow. And when the analyst was spoken to, they really were relying more on their experience in previous proficiency tests, as opposed to just looking at the data. And when we had a subsequent, again, conversation with the analyst, and it's in our documentation, they acknowledged that if it had been a regular case, they would have treated it differently. So of course that then raises other concerns about a proficiency test is supposed to be treated as you're treating a regular case. In this particular instance as well, this is an analyst who really doesn't do bench work anymore. They are off the bench, and they've been off the bench for a while. So they're really just performing technical review and administrative reviews. So the experience that they were hearkening to really could only be their proficiency tests because they weren't doing casework on a regular basis for quite a few years. So our response to that was that, well, really a proficiency test should be representative of what a casework analyst is currently doing in the lab. So we were aware that our proficiency test vendor also now offers PTs where they're just doing the interpretation part. So we have revamped our guidelines for which level analysts would do which types of test, and it's strictly based on what it is they're currently in the lab. So if they're doing bench work, they're doing the whole thing. If they're doing just admin or technical reviews, then they're only doing technical and admin reviews. Did I answer your question, or is there anything else?
No, I think you did a very thorough answer. Thank you. And I appreciate the thought that went into all the different elements, because I understand that it's sometimes difficult to know exactly what happened. And I appreciate that you investigated it in the way that you described.
I have to say that the initial report, we were just going by, an inconclusive was an unexpected result. We need to report this. But as we started doing the root cause analysis, it really brought to light some things that, sometimes you take for granted, but you don't really think about until you dig a little bit deeper. And my experience as a analyst over the years was moving up the food chain. You do less and less of I'm going to call it the fun stuff, because anyone who likes bench work is always going to like to do bench work. But you get more responsibility. You have to defer to different staff to do that because you got other stuff to do. And I know that over the years, there have been times when, all right, the quality assurance manager is saying, hey guys, you can't do AMPS anymore because that's just not your job. And it's a hard thing to try to adjust to something new. So this gave us an opportunity to look at what we were doing and see if there was something in place that we could do that focused on what it is an analyst is doing right now. And I really am happy that there is a mechanism for us to do that, so that the analysts are not, for want of they're out of their comfort zone, out of practice. They're out of practice if they're not doing it anymore. So why bother doing it if we have a mechanism to now move forward in how they are tested on their proficiency in a particular technique?
Thank you.
Does anyone have any other questions for the laboratory? Dr. Sozier?
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up, Lydia, on the issue with the limbs overriding the dates.
Yeah.
Is it possible when people put a note in just to put the date at the end of their note?
Well, yes, they can, but the other thing that we've instituted is that if each time they need to make a note, they have to create a new form. So not keep updating the same form. So it's going to have, if there's 3 notes, if there's 3 notations they need to make, they have to make 3 separate notes so that we don't have to worry about the overriding.
Is the limbs vendor going to address that?
Apparently we have a very long list of things for the limbs vendor, and it's an old system, and I'm hoping that we're going to be able to actually get something new.
Okay.
So that's our stopgap measure.
Thanks.
Thank you.
I've never heard of a limbs vendor with a short list.
I was just gonna say.
I feel your pain.
You could use a 435-page document on limbs systems. That would be very helpful.
Any other questions for Westchester County? Okay, thank you very much, Lydia and Colin, for joining us.
Thank you.
I have a question. It's not for a particular lab, but we're getting these reports, right, of they didn't do a certain test on their proficiency, and so they have to report it, and we understand why that's happening. Could we use a different phrase than unexpected result when we talk about those? Because that phrasing is like, it makes me think, oh my gosh, what happened? But then I realize, oh, it's just one of these. So is that a phrasing we have to use, or can we call these something else?
That is an A&AD phrase that they are tied to in their accreditation standards that the labs have to work with.
Okay, I didn't see it in the lab's notification, so I wasn't sure.
Yeah.
They didn't seem to be using that.
However, we did develop a form that the labs are now using for us to triage this in a different way, because these don't all rise to the level of needing to come in front of you.
Absolutely.
So you'll probably see fewer of these after this meeting.
Okay, that's what I had recalled we discussed too. Thank you.
It went into use, Lindsay, when was that, in like June, July, June?
Great, thanks.
Right. Thanks, Catherine. Does anyone have any other questions before we move to the next item, which is executive session? So the next item for the agenda is executive session, which is for us to discuss matters relating to a current investigation or matters that may lead to the appointment, promotion, demotion, discipline, or suspension of a particular person. Do I have a motion for us to go into executive session?
So moved.
Dr. Smith has made a motion. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Dr. Corrado has seconded the motion. So when I call on you, please state your vote. My vote is aye. Dr. Bieber.
Ed Bieber, aye.
Dr. Gettings.
Catherine Gettings, aye.
Dr. Sozier.
Amanda Sozier, aye.
Dr. Corrado.
Aye.
Dr. Smith.
Aye.
And Dr. Kidd.
Aye.
So at this point, if you're not a subcommittee member or staff, we'll ask you to leave the meeting, both virtually and in person. The streaming will be paused, and we will resume the stream once the executive session has ended.
Okay, we are good to go. We are being recorded on WebEx and are also live on YouTube.
Thank you. Welcome back. We finished our executive session and have nothing to report. I would like to turn it over for just a moment to Shelley to discuss one item.
Sure. I just want to, there was a document informational purposes that we received from the New York State Police. And it was a little after our deadline for our document submissions, and we oversaw providing it to the subcommittee members. We will be providing that via email to all the subcommittee members for their information. Just wanted to make sure that that was on the record. Our apologies for the oversight on that.
Before we move to the last item for determining, we'll first vote to end the meeting and then for the next meeting. Dr. Kidd and I were sort of chatting during a break about the move that's coming in the community with sequencing SNPs, and especially in areas of not only genealogy, but for doing like a SNP to SNP comparison of evidence to a person of interest. So we were just curious if we may want to ask if the BioTwig could potentially do a survey of laboratories in the state to see where they stand at the moment. Are they in the process of buying instruments or looking at kits, validating, just sort of getting a sort of lay of the land for New York as to where we stand with SNPs. And I'm sure other members of the subcommittee are interested as well in this kind of information. So I would like to ask if the BioTwig could take this up as a sort of a survey for the rest of the state. And then Shelley has some information as well to share.
Right. We can have the Catherine is our BioTwig liaison, so she will work with them on that, get them that information. Get back to you. And I do believe that there's a program with Syracuse University in the works that might help inform that as well. We'll look in the future. I think there's still some work to be done on that.
Okay. Thank you very much. The next item is for our next meeting and location. Our next meeting is on November 15th, 2024. The location is to be determined, so we'll fill you in as we determine where we will be. At this point, do I have a motion to adjourn the meeting?
So moved.
Have a motion from Dr. Smith. Dr. Gettings, I'm going to take your motion as a second. So Dr. Gettings, thank you. When I call on you, please state your vote. My vote is aye. Dr. Bieber?
Fred Bieber, aye.
Dr. Gettings?
Catherine Gettings, aye.
Dr. Sozer?
Amanda Sozer, aye.
Dr. Corrado?
Aye.
Dr. Smith?
Aye.
And Dr. Kidd?
Aye.
The meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.